And we're live.
Good afternoon, or good morning if you're in New Orleans like we are. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. We are here in New Orleans live from WISPAmerica, and I'm joined by, I guess, 3 WISPs and a consultant, or 4 weddings and a funeral. We've got a great group of wireless internet service providers, and I'm so happy and so grateful that they've been willing to attend in person in this event. We've got it set up so we could have had remote people, but and I wasn't sure we'd have everyone in person, but this is just wonderful and extraordinary. We're in the middle of WISPAmerica, which is, of course, the semi-annual conference of the wireless industry, Wireless Internet Service Providers Association, and it's an exciting conference. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit from our panelists about what they're hearing. Definitely record turnout here at this event. We at Broadband Breakfast are a news source. We cover broadband policy and internet technology. Our motto, our mantra is better broadband, better lives, but we reiterate over and over again, we're not technology specific. We understand there's sometimes you want to use wireless, there's sometimes you want to use fiber, but we are all about getting to higher capacity broadband networks in more and more places. And we do this program, this Broadband Breakfast Live Online, every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. So thank you to those of you who tune in regularly on our platforms, whether it's Zoom or YouTube or Twitter or Facebook. We're streaming on all of those platforms. Or in person, we are now doing in-person events on the second Wednesday of each month at Clyde's of Gallery Place in Washington. So go to Broadband Breakfast and sign up for our updates so you can get those. Let me lay out a little bit about our topic today, because we're going to be talking about, should wireless internet service providers overbuild themselves? Okay, now this term overbuilding, I kind of have a big bugaboo with it. I hate it whenever it gets asked, because in some ways, it's about competition. It's about multiple players offering different services, whether it's wireless or fiber or cable or other providers. But it sometimes has a specific connotation in the sense of government funding for building another provider when there's one there. And I know WISPs have raised issues with overbuilding before. It's something I've heard repeatedly at WISP events. And so we're going to kind of tackle the subject head on. And namely, given that there is 65 billion, 42.5 in one program of government funding through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, what should be the posture of WISPs like 3 of you and WISPs that you consult with, Donnie, when they think about this topic? And in some ways, you all as WISPs have kind of a great advantage if you were to choose to overbuild yourselves, because you know the customers, you're offering service. And so I really want to leave this topic open to as many interpretations as possible. I know it's a topic that's being talked about here. Again, just to reiterate, while we're here at WISPA, this is not a WISPA program, so completely not endorsed by WISPA. But I hope many of you are watching, and I hope that you'll watch the replays, because these are available for free. And I guess the last thing I want to say before I open up to our panelists, to thank our sponsors. We are sponsored by Utopia Fiber, by Lit Communities, by Broadband.money, by Broadband Now, by Lightbox, by Render Networks, by Samsung Positron Access Systems, Positron Access, and also by the California Emerging Technology Fund and Samsung. So with that out of the way, I want to turn to our guests. Jason Guzzo is the CEO of Hudson Valley Wireless, and look forward to you telling a little bit about your experience. Let me just go ahead and mention everyone up front. Matt Larson. Matt is the CEO of VistaBeam. Matt, I know you're a longtime WISPA kind of leader. You've had multiple roles. Love your perspective broadly, as well as everyone's perspective broadly, about where WISP's minds are at on this topic. Donnie Smith. Donnie is just the title, Donnie. I know the organization. CEO. You're CEO. Very good. Sometimes it's hard to remember that one, right? Donnie's the CEO of Fibersmith, which is a very interesting company that kind of melds the software, the engineering, and the financial tools. I know you work with a lot of WISPs, and as your name might suggest, you're about fiber. So let's hear from you too. And last but not least, we have Rory Conaway. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Rory's the CEO of Triad Wireless, and you serve an area in Arizona that extends to the Grand Canyon. So look forward to hearing about your thoughts on the rural, the urban, the mix there, and what technology is right to get the job done. So with that, let's turn it over to Jason, open it up. Tell us what your thoughts are on this word overbuilding and how Hudson Valley Wireless approaches this.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this topic. It's a very interesting topic and something that we're very used to. Being in the technology business, we overbuild ourselves all the time because we're constantly upgrading technology. We do a lot of public-private partnerships where we partner with the county governments, deploy a lot of our network on public safety and municipal assets, partner with state and federal programs to get some money to drive networks out into the rural and remote communities. What we've been seeing throughout the years, we've been receiving certain grants for certain speed tiers, and it seems that the consumers have a need for speed, or at least a perceived need for speed, which is constantly getting us into either ripping and replacing equipment or upgrading equipment. So the more that we do that, we got to focus more on driving fiber deeper into the networks, either as last mile connectivity or middle mile connectivity, to provide connections out to the constituents. So a little bit about us. We've deployed most recently about 3,500 square miles of advanced LTE. We're currently offering speeds of 200 by 20 down to the consumers, and that seems to be working out very well. That's really all the consumers need. There is part of the discussion, a lot of the funding is pushing synchronous 100 by 100 connections, which would, depending on the funding source, drive a need for more fiber connectivity. But right now, the advanced LTE systems that we're deploying are 100 by 20. So as we start driving the network further out into the rural and remote communities, we might need to leverage overbuilding fiber to either connect more small cell wireless deployments, expand some front haul with the LTE systems. So overbuilding, it's a tough term, but it's almost like a necessary evil for expanding some of these networks.
Well, that's great, a great background. Jason, just tell us quickly before we go on to Matt, have you applied for or received funding under any of the prior programs like the Connect America Fund Round 2 or the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund Round 1 or any other programs?
We recently applied for the last round of NTIA through a consortium of connected partners. It was ourselves as a WISP operator, 6 counties banded together. Spectrum was one of the applicants that was part of the covered partnership. There was a telco and a cable company. There was only about $288 million worth of funding in that funding round. And the issue that we have is New York is somewhere between 95 and 98% connected at this point. So they've already put $670 million worth of broadband capital into play. And a lot of those areas have already been built out and deployed. So it's the last remaining homes that are the most expensive from a cost to serve model. So that made New York not competitive with the rest of the country, where your average cost to serve is around $2,000 per home. I think our combined grant application was somewhere around $6,500 per connected home.
So good to know, and we'll definitely come back to numbers and finances as we continue this discussion, particularly when we're dealing with 65 billion or 42 billion as opposed to 280 million. So,
absolutely, that'll align the economics a little bit better.
Very good. Matt, let's turn to you.
So yeah, the idea of overbuilding ourselves is, as Jason said, we've been doing that from the start.
Yeah.
I was talking with somebody yesterday, and we were talking about pricing and how we hadn't really increased our prices almost since the start. And when we started, I think our low-end package was $384K, and now our low-end package is 25 meg, and that has just that's a reflection of the amount of improvement we've seen in the wireless technology, but you also have to go out and overbuild yourself consistently to continue to get the upgrades. So up to this point, we had kind of figured on about a 5-year cycle of going out, putting the wireless technology out there, and then about the time you get done, it's time to start going back out and upgrading again. It's been really interesting the last 2-3 years because of, between the pandemic, it feels like the pandemic just shoved us about 3-4 years into the future.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all these things we needed to have, equipment that could do more upload and obviously a lot more download. We're seeing about 13-to-1 download versus upload.
Could you just explain that a little bit? 13-to-1, what does that mean?
So I'm a member of BITAG, it's a broadband infrastructure.
Spell that out. That's a great group.
BITAG, BITAG, Broadband Infrastructure Technology Advisory Group.
And that's FCC, or
it's a separate organization that provides policy recommendations. And they did a study right after the pandemic that showed the ratio was 13-to-1 download versus upload. So, we've had to kind of optimize our networks to what customers demand. And that's what we've basically been doing. So once the pandemic hit, we were fortunate that we had done a lot of upgrades ahead of time to be able to meet the demand with our existing customers. And then we were able to take advantage of CARES Act funding to go out and build out into Wyoming and Nebraska parts of our territory and really bump that up to the point where now we have 100 meg available across the majority of our network to residential end users. We're in the process of upgrading the upload capacity so that we can meet those needs better and just getting it out to as many people as possible. So there's kind of that combination of overbuilding yourself, but then also making sure you can get out to as much of your footprint as you can. And that's been, like I said, it's just a constant thing, that churn of, as soon as you get done, well, then it's time to start upgrading again to whatever the next level is. I think it's important for us to do that because that's how a lot of these places ended up with a digital divide, was because a company in that area put in the infrastructure and put in the minimums required and then just let it sit. So there's a community we're in where we have, with fixed wireless, I believe 50% market penetration because the incumbent carrier put in DSL infrastructure in the early 2000s and has never upgraded it.
Wow.
And so that's a situation where you can milk that for a while, but at a certain point, you're going to end up losing a lot of your customer base. We've got parts of our customer area where the incumbent carrier is well under 15%. And that's a reflection of what happens if you don't go out.
15% market penetration.
15% market
They've gone
penetration.
from 100, whatever, to 15. You've taken their lunch, 85% of their lunch from.
Well, it's not just us. There's
Yeah.
other providers too that have done that. But what we've seen in the urban areas within city limits, either cable or in some cases fiber overbuilders have taken the majority of the market share from them. When you get outside of town, then we have some big areas where wireless ISPs are by far the dominant carrier outside of city limits in a lot of rural areas in America.
What part of the country are you in, Matt?
So I'm in western Nebraska, eastern Wyoming, and northern Colorado.
Okay. And when you make this point about the contention ratios, I hear this at WISP events, right? You're saying that the customers, by their demands, download 13 times what they upload.
Yes.
Okay, square that thought with me, Matt, from what we hear over and over again, that during the pandemic, it was the upstream that showed itself as the weak link, right? So are you saying that an ISP that's responding to customer demand should be offering like 100 down and 8 up, or 1,000 down and 80 up, or are you saying something different?
I'm saying the customers or providers need to make sure the customers' applications work like they should. That's the number one most important thing. The talk about symmetrical upload is a way to push. That's a way to push fiber, basically. I'll just say it straight up.
Okay.
If you want to talk about symmetrical upload, you can do it with wireless, but it requires a dedicated connection or using different types of equipment.
Right.
But real world scenarios, 95+% of residential users are never going to use symmetrical upload. it's a fringe use case.
Okay.
So we respond to what customers actually use and try and make sure that their applications work and do everything we can to take care of that, number one.
Well, I do want to come back to kind of the fiber versus wireless as a technological deployment, all other things being equal as we continue. But let's get some more voices in this conversation. So Donnie Smith, tell us a little bit about FiberSmith, FiberSmith's story, and what's your take on WISPs overbuilding themselves with fiber?
Sure. Before I do that though, I just want to finish on Matt's statement. 95% of residences don't need it. Probably 90% of all the businesses don't need symmetrical either.
They don't?
No.
Okay.
Symmetrical is a myth. I mean, the only reason people talk about it is because they do it in Europe and people here say, oh, they did it in Europe, we should do that.
Yep.
Well, we'd still be doing reels if that was what we needed for dances, if we did what Europe did. So there's nothing wrong with symmetrical per se. I mean, nobody would be unhappy if they have symmetrical, but they don't really know what it means and they don't really need it. And this is from a guy who's been doing fiber for 22 years.
This is interesting to hear. So tell us more about FiberSmith. We'll come back to this.
So FiberSmith is a company that evolved from the, at one time I was an ISP, just like almost all of you guys. And we did everything from wireless and copper. We resold circuits. We did uni loops. We did fiber. We did coax. We did everything. And when I sold that, there were a lot of other companies struggling to do some of these things. So we decided to start a company to help other companies survive, thrive, and evolve in this business. I think we worked with a couple of you guys over the years. When we try and do what you need as a customer to get where you're going, because everybody isn't going to the same place. And they don't need to go to the same place. So that's what FiberSmith is. We obviously specialize in fiber. Most of you wireless guys, you already have better engineers on staff than what we can do, or at least as good, and there's no point in duplicating, reinventing the wheel. But we can help in a lot of other ways with design and applications for funding and engineering and things like that. So that's what we're here to do, is try to do that and to move the industry forward. That's always been one of our things, is trying to move the entire industry forward. And so that's what we're about.
So can you say a little bit more about what's this kind of typical use case for a WISP that comes to you and says, we need to do fiber? What's going on?
So there's various reasons why WISPs decide they need to do fiber. It starts out as maybe they need fiber to a tower so they can get some transport and get enough bandwidth at the tower to provide to customers. It starts the other way sometimes, where they have plenty of bandwidth to a tower, but they have too much tree obstruction or other litter in the area, and so they want to do fiber away from the tower so they can serve all the customers there. A lot of times once they get into fiber, they find out how much less, shall we say, upgrades it takes. Maintenance, yes. It's less effort to keep it running than it is wireless. So once they start getting there, then they get hungry for that operational efficiency, lower CapEx, lower OpEx. So they pay the CapEx up front to get the lower OpEx. And so then it expands out into neighborhoods and into towns, and eventually some of them completely overbuild themselves with fiber. They do it for two reasons. One is for operational efficiency or income that they see long-term for themselves. But the second thing is to protect themselves from other people doing it. And while overbuild is often considered a bad word, it's a word that most of us did at some point for one reason or another. We had to do it because otherwise nobody'd have anything. And like you said, Matt, I've never heard it stated that way, both of you guys, Matt and Jason, that you're overbuilding yourselves all the time anyway. And we've run into companies that are in more metropolitan areas that are wireless, and they decided they had to overbuild themselves with fiber so they didn't get run out of the market. But in the rural areas, there are places where the fiber just, it can't economically make it. And until the government decides they're willing to pay $160,000 a house to put those last houses up, it isn't going to happen. And Jason, your numbers are 6,000. That's actually pretty good.
That's on the low side.
I was going to say, that's actually pretty good. We did we did an application just on the reconnect that's going in right now, and it's at 16,000 a house. And it's not rough country, it's just long country. And there's just no way, it costs what it costs, and there's no way to get around it. The benefit of fiber is you don't have to replace it. You know, the fiber that's been in the ground 40 years still looks like the fiber that it went in the ground as. And small upgrades on electronics are easier, faster than they are on wireless, and they don't have to be done as often, maybe once every 10 or 20 years instead of every 5. And instead of forklifting everything, you're just doing the ends.
Really want to get everyone's perspective on this, but we can't keep Rory out here any longer. So Rory, tell us a little bit about Triad Wireless, what your business is about, and your take on this subject matter.
So Triad Wireless is it's an ISP out of the Phoenix area. We do have areas covering from Grand Canyon down to Nogales now in Arizona, so we've been able to expand out. We're starting to get into more rural areas outside the Phoenix metro area, small towns around the state that need services. To your guys' point about the fiber costs, we actually saw a bid recently that was $1 million per house for 6 houses to get submitted for a government grant. And had we not been the company that bid on it, they would have probably gotten it. So fiber costs are high. I'm not exactly, I think the one point that you made, Matt, about the 5-year refresh, up until now, that's been pretty accurate, kind of like Moore's Law has been pretty accurate. I think though, with the latest equipment, and this is a decision we made last week, we're not going to be deploying fiber to any houses. We're staying with the wireless equipment. We see that the 1 gig service speeds that we're able to get out of existing equipment, what's coming out in the next few months, means that 5-year cycle will probably get extended out further. We don't see a lot of people needing more than 1 gig. And then the reality is very few people even need more than 50 meg. And so overbuilding is necessary, I think, in this generation, and then this generation is going to extend that time frame out further than it has been in the past. The analogy to that would be the latest Windows processors that we got 4 years ago still run Windows 11 today. Why would you upgrade your hardware? And so we're seeing that same scenario playing out with the wireless field. The hardware that we're getting today is actually capable of future upgrades through firmware of up to 4 to 8 gigabits per second. So I don't think it's going to be obsoleted as fast as it has been historically.
So what technology or what equipment are you talking about here, Rory?
Pretty much all of it, to tell you the truth. 5 gig spectrum, you've got 802.11ax coming out. If the vendors get that cleared up and the FCC gets their 6 gig spectrum put together, you've got 300 to 800 meg coming out and usable of actual spectrum available to the houses. You've got 60 gig spectrum and 60 gig spectrum that's been extended out now. We're running it out at 2 miles at 1 gig per second. But it is also a vegetative issue in the sense that our world does not have a lot of vegetation versus some of the other gentlemen, where anywhere up north, anywhere where you've got trees, it's a different ballgame. However, I believe there's another vendor that just came out with equipment that we're testing that may change that even further. So you've got Tirana coming out with some pretty impressive CBRS equipment. We see them hitting 200 to 300 meg in high vegetative areas for a mile and a half, and we're expecting in 18 months that to go faster. So wireless technology is moving so fast right now that I think they're finally hitting a cusp where it's not a technology that's going to be easily obsolete. Then you also have the backup model that too. Everybody who gets fiber, a whole lot of people want a secondary carrier because that fiber goes down. It's not with wireless; it's a service call. With fiber, we see it down for a week in Phoenix. That's a big problem.
So interesting perspective, Rory, and I want to give the others a chance to weigh in. So I've almost heard sort of 3 voices that we really do need to start to develop fiber. I'm not saying you're fiber heads and you're continuing to have wireless. You run wireless internet service providers, and even Donnie surprised me with his statement about 95% of businesses don't need symmetrical uploads. But what do you, Jason and Matt and Donnie, what do you think about what Rory has just said, where he's basically said, we're going to bet on sticking with wireless?
Well, we're taking the same approach. We're going to bet on sticking with wireless. And we've been overbuilding ourselves, but we've also been overbuilt because there's been so much grant capital that's been put into play. Our current network passes 120,000 homes, 8,500 businesses, and 450 anchor institutions. And we've been seeing that there's a need for one or more broadband connections into some of the businesses as they push more applications to the cloud. And as they push most of their employees to work from home, then some of those employees need one or more broadband connections in order to maintain some continuity. So that's fine if they have a wireline connectivity as a primary, but most places, if they have a need for broadband connection, they might need a redundant connection in there, and that's what fixed wireless offers.
Do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years, Jason, as like what's your mix right now of customers on wireless versus customers on fiber?
I would say we're probably 99% on fixed wireless at this point.
Okay.
And we'll probably continue to be that way.
You think it'll stay that high?
Correct.
Why? Why wouldn't you not convert your customers to fiber as you do fiber?
It's not economical. If it was economical for somebody to do that, it would have been done already.
Yeah.
And there's already been several investment rounds with $670 million worth of grant funding that was put into our area. And the incumbent providers couldn't even make that work by edging out their networks.
Yeah.
So it's significantly more difficult for a non-incumbent provider to come in and start to do those types of deployments. I think where we add some value is we can connect some of the hardest to reach areas at significantly less than $100,000 per passing. I think some of our average passing costs were sub $1,000 for trying to get connectivity to some of the rural and remote areas.
You're talking now wireless or fiber?
Definitely talking wireless for those numbers. Fiber, we've done some studies and we've actually run some numbers in some of the areas. Some of the very remote communities, it's going to cost over $100,000 to connect some of those homes. It's just not economical.
Yeah.
Some of them are on the wrong side of railroad tracks. Some of them are on the wrong side of the lake. Well, there is no wrong side of the lake, but in terms of connectivity, it's difficult to do that. That's why we need to use wireless to be the connections over there.
Okay. Matt and Donnie, what's your take on this question that Rory's laid out on the marker here, which is it's just not necessary?
So I think it makes sense to use the right tool for the right job. So there are places where it makes more sense to use fiber, but it has to do with the demographics of the area, it has to do with right of way, it has to do demand of the customer. So if I've got a situation where I'm working with a town that has a lot of trees and we've got the ability to get right of way easily, and we don't have a ton of make-ready costs, then it makes sense to look at fiber there because you've got enough density to do that. If you don't have that, it makes more sense to use wireless. And if you take it out into the rural areas, the cost differential just goes up exponentially. So a couple of years ago, I actually did a paper with David Reed where we explored universal service in a rural county in Nebraska. We worked with the county to get the GIS locations, the GIS information for every single business and residential location within the county. I think there were 382, somewhere around between 300 and 400 locations. And what we determined was to do wireless, it looked pretty expensive to me because we were going to have to build about four or five towers and do a fair amount of repeaters and stuff like that to get to every person in the county. And I believe our cost came out to being right around $1,800 to $2,000 per home in this county. So it was going to
and again on wireless or
this is fixed wireless. This is to do 100
yeah.
down, 20 up, fixed wireless service. And this was using equipment that's a couple of generations older because this was 2 years ago we did the paper. And I believe our cost came out to, it was under $1 million. I want to say it was around 800,000 was what we figured it would cost to do this with wireless. The cost to do it with fiber was $30 million. So you're talking about a nearly 15x difference between fixed wireless and fiber to make that jump from 100 down, 20 up to gigabit. There's no economic justification for that. It just doesn't make any sense to try and do that. And that's where I'm saying right tool for the right job. The other thing I like about fixed wireless, and I think that kind of plays to Rory's what he's talking about, I've always considered fixed wireless to be kind of a regulatory bypass. So there are all these tools. Even Google, the richest company in the world with the smartest people and access to almost unlimited amounts of money, could not overcome the right-of-way issues in some of the towns where the incumbents decided to really fight them. So even Google has switched and started focusing on fixed wireless in urban areas.
That is an excellent point, Matt, and I think it's worth kind of calling out a little bit more, right? I mean, it's in some ways there's like this trade-off, and there's cost trade-off that we've talked a little bit about. There's terrain trade-off, and just some of our viewers may not be aware that the issue is that fixed wireless can have problems with trees and other foliage. So parts of the country that have more of that, namely the eastern part, WISPs may not have as great a toehold or foothold or handhold there that they do in western, midwestern, and western parts of the country. But the point you've just made, which is that WISPs and wireless are quick, right? You can do things fast, right? I mean, when we talk fiber, we're talking lots of regulatory, poles, rights of way. You referred to Google and the problem they had in Google Fiber. So how does that kind of play into this, right? And I mean, if I may offer a suggestion, can it play into the notion of using wireless to get the customers, but then also planning to build fiber for durability, reliability? And that would be kind of hypothesis, straw man. Shoot it down, please.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't want to jump in, but absolutely, I think I've always felt like the best thing to do is to go out and build fiber over the top, and then build fiber out slow, or build wireless over the top, and then build fiber out to feed first the wireless towers, and then extend from the wireless towers out, and do that over a period of time.
Yeah.
And instead of expecting to have a giant government subsidy to pay for everything up front, do it over a period of time, use the cash flow from the customers. If you use the model that wireless ISPs have always used, which is to continually overbuild ourselves with our customer revenue and be able to still maintain a profitable and economically resilient business, we can build that fiber out over a period of time as it makes economic sense, as opposed to the culture of bigger companies that are looking for subsidies to go out and build fiber all in one big shot. And doing so is driving the cost of fiber through the roof right now.
Let me ask you the same question I asked Jason, which is what percent of your customers are served by fixed wireless right now versus fiber, and how will those numbers be different in 5 and 10 years?
Right now, we're about probably like Jason, probably 99%, 98%. We do have some fiber. We're using it mostly for middle mile. I anticipate in 10 years, it's probably going to be a mix of more like 80-20, 70-30. Fixed wireless versus fiber. I think we're going to primarily be that as one of our strengths. Fixed wireless is future proof because towers are, if you look at fiber is just immediate.
Yeah.
A tower that gets put up somewhere is useful just as long as a fiber is.
Yeah.
And all the associated infrastructure that goes with that. So I think we're going to continue to upgrade. I also think fixed wireless is going to, even if the broadband side of it starts to shrink, I think that there's other applications related to wireless that are going to be extremely beneficial, doing Internet of Things type applications.
Oh, this is a great point.
New kinds of communication. That's all going to run on that. Fiber doesn't do that. Fiber is very limited in its scope because it can't go out and reach all these different points. It's geographically isolated to that one point. You have to have wireless to get out to the majority of all the new use cases that are coming out.
So we don't want to cut anyone off, but we're getting a boatload of questions here. I'm really glad to see them, and I'll start to roll them out here. Michael Shear asks, user upload requirement speeds will most probably increase as greater amounts of high resolution photography and advanced interactive video systems take hold. Quick responses, anyone to these? I'm going to lay it in. Yes, okay.
No, seriously, the upload speeds have been stagnant for quite a while as a 1-to-10, 1-to-20 kind of ratio. The things that are starting to change that are interestingly entertainment, whether it's an MMORPG or something that's rather blue. It's starting to change the things, and as we get farther into AI and VR, I suspect these numbers are actually going to get a lot closer to equal than they are now. But I don't think they're ever going to get to the point where they require symmetrical. But I think that the bandwidth on these requirements is going to go up, continue to go up at the rate it has over the last 50 years.
Which
And
is,
yes, I bet around
which is
that
what rate?
doubles every 2.5 years.
Okay.
And that has been doing it for 50 years since I started at 100 baud, which is 12 characters per second in case you're
Okay.
counting.
Well, I'd like to sidebar follow up on this to see if it really is that slow, right? But let's keep going to some questions here. And I'm trying to focus on questions rather than comments or rants in the comments here. Mike Dunn, this is a bit of a comment, but we can make it a question. Mike Dunn asked, I would contend that if someone is upgrading their fiber to the home system from 1 gigabit to 10 gigabits, the OLT, optical line terminal, and optics costs are minimal, comparably speaking. Providers who deploy PON, passive optical networks, XGS PON today, for example, can provision any speed up to 10 gigabits and face effectively zero upgrade costs for the foreseeable future. I don't think wireless can meet that bar. So the question is that true, right? I mean, like at the start we heard of this conversation, including from Jason and Matt, we heard, okay, like there is some reliability to fiber. Yeah, there's more CapEx, but the reliability, the upgrades are not as great as the system-wide every 5 years or so. Rory offered a kind of dissenting view here. You're feeling like the current technology is going to break out of that cycle of equipment refresh on a big scale every 5 years. What do you think of this question and the upgrades that will be necessary on wireless versus fiber networks?
Well, I don't disagree with the point that faster is better from the simplicity standpoint, but that there's also things that we can do from a network management perspective and how we run our networks, over subscription ratios, to provide users with good quality broadband connections. So as long as the networks that we provide can meet the needs of the emerging applications, really we need to be technology agnostic.
Well, I would say anybody study economics knows that you get a certain amount of gains for every technological jump on this. So the jump from 100 baud to 1200 baud, pretty substantial, you know. To go from dial-up to DSL was like another leap. But when you go from, when you go from 128K ISDN connection to a 10 meg DSL, it's more valuable, but the value starts to be less and less. So we're at a point where what's the actual value of the jump from 1 gig to 10 gig? Are there any applications that actually use that? I mean, what kind of data are we going to have to be pushing?
Right.
And at a certain point, like application design has to come into it. Like, talking about VR and high-res photography is still minimal bandwidth, even at current upload speeds.
Right.
I do VR iRacing.
On
My wireless connection, I have lower latency than most of the people I operate with. I've had a very high degree of reliability, and it's good software design.
Yeah.
The high bandwidth kind of covers up for some bad software design. So I don't think the jump from 1 gig to 10 gig is going to be all that important for most consumers. You're talking about so far out in the future that it just doesn't make any sense. So that would be my contention. The customers are going to be the ones to decide. I moved to a new house in town and had I had a gig fiber connection. And for the heck of it, I put a wireless radio up to see if there was any difference. And I switched the gateway to run on the wireless system, and nobody in my house noticed. Was on a 100 down, 50 up wireless connection. So we got rid of the fiber.
Yeah.
There was no need for it.
Interesting. We do have a question here, as well as many comments from Brett Glass. He does ask, to how many customers can this LTE system supply 200 megabits per second simultaneously? I'm not sure which speaker was talking about an LTE system. We do
LTE. The majority of the systems we deploy now are 4T4R, which means 4 transmits, 4 receives.
Okay.
There's currently equipment that's out of the market that can do massive MU MIMO, which can do 64T, 64R. So 64 transmits, 64 receive with the massive MU MIMO. I'm sorry, I can't do the engineering math on the
Sure,
fly
on the
here,
spot,
but
yeah.
we can support a massive amount of customers, but I don't know the exact numbers at this point.
Yeah, okay.
And not everybody's pulling 200 megs simultaneously off the same tower. That's just not realistic.
Could you elaborate a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, when people ask about theoretical maximums, you're looking at, like you just said, you've got 120 or 64 radios coming down, so you got 136 meg of capacity, but I'm sorry, who cares? You know, all these people are not trying to download 200 meg at the same time. You know, typically we see about 4 users are pulling, 4 or 5 users are pulling maybe a third of what they normally use. But the average is most people use 4 to 5 meg over a 24-hour period, and that's it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, we're way beyond that technically at this point.
Okay. Again, I'm kind of skipping over comments because there's a lot of them here. But let's get to something we can turn into a question. Again, Mike Dunn asks, don't get me wrong, wireless absolutely has a place in the broadband ecosystem. To equate it with fiber is somewhat disingenuous. With regard to bandwidth need, in my own opinion, multiple televisions, mobile services, and laptops, smart home devices, and streaming at home can bring their wireless system to its knees, albeit that's usually the Wi-Fi system.
Sorry.
Okay,
Sorry.
so
Badly run ones, maybe.
again, we've got comments on both sides, okay? So we got other people saying, look, no one needs a gigabit, there's not necessary, right? Those comments there. So let's kind of talk beyond the comments. What are the real needs and what are the problems in meeting those needs, okay? You guffawed on
What's that?
you
Yeah.
doubted the fact that, quote, bring a wireless system to their needs, right? Because you think that wireless can meet the challenges.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not the last mile part. The real bottleneck is the in-house Wi-Fi.
Let's talk a bit about that.
In most cases.
Yeah.
So
How do you address that problem of like the routers limited capabilities? What do you do for customers who say, I can't get this and the problem is the router?
We're trying to offer a fully managed solution where we can troubleshoot the connection down to the last foot instead of the last mile. So we want to be able to offer a white glove concierge service to our customers by delivering good quality broadband, not only to the home, but to all of their connected devices and make sure that they can connect that.
Very interesting. So how does that work exactly? Is that just like more average revenue per user, more ARPU? What's the upsell there?
Well, I think customer loyalty. So we want to make sure that we're providing them with a good quality service, whether it's the problems with connectivity in their home. We can solve that by putting in a good quality router and make sure that we can troubleshoot to make sure all the devices connect. Because at the end of the day, the consumer, if their iPhone doesn't connect, they think it's the ISP. And we've been finding through the support tickets that the majority of support calls that we receive are problems with their in-home connectivity. So for an extra $10 a month, if we can provide them with a managed wireless solution, that seems to be a good fit for us.
And if I could just add on to
jump
that,
in.
it's not just wireless. This is the same problem for fiber. It is the in-house connectivity. It's the same exact problem. And this is the solution that actually seems to work. The $10, we see that cost from 6 to 12 in general. So you have a little bit higher revenue stream, but you can cut your support tickets by 50 or 60%, your truck rolls by 40%, and you get happier customers with less churn because of this savings of things. So you're saving costs, you're getting more revenue, you're saving costs, and you're getting happy customers, pretty much a trifecta.
Mm-hmm. You know, we just had a discussion about this yesterday in one of the sessions, but one of the things that we've decided to really focus on is that customer empowerment, making sure that the customer feels like they have what they need. And so, like, one of the things we did is instead of trying to see how many installs we could do in a day, we focused it down and said, all right, if an installer does 2 installs a day, they have enough time to talk to the customer and run the wire the way that they want it, to look for the best place in the house, to put the router, to look and say, you know what, you have a big house. It would be great if you bought the upgraded plan where we could put meshes so that your stuff works on the porch and here and there, and then to answer their questions, like really take care of them. So taking that extra time to take care of the customer and make sure that they can do exactly what they want, it builds that customer loyalty. And we can do a better job of addressing the technical issue with the wireless within the house, but it also builds great customer loyalty.
Yeah.
People feel like they're getting taken care of, and it shows. I think there's this persistent myth that fixed wireless operators don't know what they're doing. But from what I've seen, I've been looking at Google ratings for a lot of the different operators, and there are a lot of fixed wireless operators have higher ratings than fiber providers. I can tell you, we're sitting at 4.7 on Google. Nextlink, which is one of the biggest, has a 4.9. We're doing the job. We're really taking care of our customers. We're not trying to cover it up with big numbers on download or big numbers on upload, or that it has to be fiber. We're taking care of the customer. It's the most important thing.
Rory, do you have anything to add to this point about kind of the last foot of the connection?
We've been providing the router to the customer for free since day one. So we knew that was going to be a big issue, and we just give them the router. Then we offer them upgraded routers if they have bigger houses or something that they can do. But in all cases, we manage the router down to every single customer. And yeah, it cuts tech support time down, way down. The problem is there's billions of devices out there. A lot of them have crappy Wi-Fi chipsets in them. And people don't realize that those chipsets actually start failing slowly over a period of time. And as they fail, connectivity gets worse. And you're always the reason for that to happen. It's not the Chinese tablet they bought 17 years ago that the kids are beating on in the back room.
Yeah.
So it definitely helps a lot.
This is a comment from Russ Elliott, but I'm going to make an exception. He says, love listening to these companies who are actively solving the rural broadband issues and not just sit on the sidelines complaining in a chat. Matt Larson's VistaBeam is an example of a company that others should emulate, as he is a partner and a doer. To solve rural broadband, we need to be inclusive with all tech. So shout out to what you're doing from Russ, who's worked in Wyoming, right?
I would throw out a shout back at Russ. Of the states that we've worked with, Russ did a fantastic job. And one of the best things he did was get providers and communities together to help resolve issues.
Yeah.
I give an example. There was one town in Wyoming that he went to, and they had very overpriced, underperforming broadband. And they called Russ, and he was there for a meeting. And he says, well, Matt's in this area, let me give him a call. So he gave me a call, and I told him, I said, hey, if we can get on the water tank, we'll get something done. 45 days later, we were deployed in that tank.
No, that's a great example. And as IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, rolls out, the state broadband officials, like Russ was in this role, are going to be very, very crucial.
And we need a couple hundred more Russ Elliots to go out and take care of these states. That he was fantastic to work with, and I miss him.
We have another question here. Do you feel that the government is being technologically neutral, or is it unfairly favoring specific technologies such as fiber? Any reactions to that?
Well, I think it's
unfairly favored. Yeah, it's unfairly trying to do fiber, and it's their money, so they get to pick the technology. But we saw it in the RDOF bid big time. It was very, very oriented towards fiber, even though it's 2 years later, and most of the RDOF bids haven't even started deployment yet. Versus our wireless. I mean, the last bid we won, we were up like Matt. We were 45 days. We did one in 4 weeks, and had 30 kids online in 4 weeks. So, it is unfairly skewed towards fiber. The problem is wireless is now catching up to the throughput. It's what people need. Wireless can already exceed what people need, and economically, it's by far the best option, at least for the next 5 years that I can see.
So I have a little different perspective on that.
Of course, you're a fiber guy.
Yes, I think it's actually skewed against fiber too hard. And the reason is simply not this. The technology, I agree with you. And what you're doing with wireless, I certainly agree with you guys. And you guys at least know that I used to do wireless.
Yep.
And we used it the same way you do. We used it as an edge out. Our analogy was it was an extension cord. We put the extension cord in until we actually had the wiring done. But the problem is what the government is paying for is infrastructure, hard, long-term infrastructure. And while you're right, a tower goes up for 50 years, the radios don't. And when you're putting in fiber, that is a long-term 50 to 100-year infrastructure.
Do the electronics on the fiber last for 50 years? Because the fiber I've seen has been replaced twice already, just like replacing radios.
So in this point, and I can only give you the examples from my old company because it's the only one I know.
Yeah.
But the equipment we put in 1999 to 2002, 98% of it's still in service. So from that standpoint, no, it isn't going to make 50 years because it stops at 500 megs. But at this point, it's at $1.92 per month to have that gear in, which is pretty efficient.
Well, but to his point, it costs 30 times more to put the fiber in.
So then how did I do it without any grants?
So great point. So now,
So right now they're talking about grants and they're getting down to this stuff that's way out, right? I mean, and some of this stuff is, and I'm not going to even fight you on this because it's true. You know, it costs more to put fiber in than wireless when you get into the fringe cases. Some of the places wireless isn't very efficient either. Nothing's efficient.
Now, I would totally agree with you with that.
You know what I
The-
mean?
the
And so
right-
we're talking to satellite, right? And that's
Yeah.
a better solution in some places, some of the time.
Right tool, right
the
tool.
right tool.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean,
if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yep.
But-
So,
a grant is
But-
not a grant. A grant is a loan. That's money the government's borrowing to put that fiber in. So now
so whether you
amortize
want
the
to
cost
call
of that
it a
loan
grant
in
or a loan, the point is what they're trying to do is come up with a way to subsidize this build so it isn't costing $6,000 to the company or the consumer, but it's costing the $2,000 that's normal. And it's more like a subsidy, and as a subsidy, then it should do what it is. And my analogy to this is real simple. If we built the interstate system the way they've done this with broadband, and this has nothing to do with wireless, this has to do with government regulations and controls. We'd have sections of it that were still made out of mud because that's all we needed for horse and buggies, and that was what they funded at the time. Then they went up to 4.1, so now we got gravel roads, and then they went up to 10.1, and we got blacktop roads. And now they're going to 100 by 20, so we're going to our 25.3, and so we're going to get paved roads. But they don't ever go back and rebuild the other sections. So you're going at 80 miles an hour down the interstate and you hit a mud section, it just doesn't work. And if that's how they did this, and it is, that's what we're getting. The wireless is gone and built over all these mud sections, if you will, because it's more efficient. It works better, it does it better, but they still haven't gone back and done the mud sections, and they're not going to, not for a long time. And so that's what they're trying to do now, at least as well as I understand it, is they're trying to build that infrastructure so it's all similar as much as they can.
So part of the concern I have with that, and I think from a purely policy and technology point of view, I think you're right. Part of the problem I see with that is if you pay somebody else, one company gets the grants to build that section out, and then it potentially, they're the only ones.
So-
And we have a little bit of that issue with power, and I know fiber advocates love to talk about rural electric is like this great example. I think it's a terrible example.
Why? Why is it terrible?
I think it's a terrible example because if you look, let's say we're starting from scratch. Would it make more sense now to go out and run wires to all the houses? Or would it make more sense in certain areas to put solar and alternative energy in places where it's less expensive to do that? Because, and it's even more extreme than that, because in 95% of applications, fixed wireless is a 100% acceptable substitute for a fiber connection that costs a tiny amount of what it costs to put fiber in. And yet we want to pay to do this other deal, even though this can pay for itself over time without the need for the grant and eventually get upgraded to that point.
So this is wonderful, and I'm really glad we've had this exchange here. We've got about 5 more minutes, and I'd like to ask you in that time, let's just put on your hats and say, all right, the government has decided, as it has indeed decided, to spend this money, right? And whether or not it is biased or tilted towards fiber, we had some disagreements about that. Let's just say you as a WISP have an opportunity to go for that fiber, so to speak. What would you do? Like, what are the steps that a WISP should take, right? So like, you know, if not the rural electric co-op model, what's the WISP model, right? What's the right thing for WISPs to do over the next, 6 months, year, and longer if they wanted to overbuild themselves with grants for building fiber? Let's get everyone's take on this.
Well, I'd like to answer that maybe a little bit differently here, because I think everybody that's on this panel is all looking towards universal service. How can we get everybody connected in the country? And that's what the policymakers are looking to do. But we want to pick the right tool for the right location, which is going to be economical to do so. So in our opinion, we favor a terrestrial-based solution, and I want to stress terrestrial-based, that meets the speed and latency and technology needs of the consumer, not only now, but for years to come. What's going to happen is that there's like well over $100 billion that's out there in grant funding that's available to any of the recipients. But that's not enough money to run fiber to every single home. So unless the government spends that money wisely, what's going to end up happening is you're going to further the digital divide for the people that are left unconnected. If you exclude fixed wireless from some of these state bidding processes, I hope they like satellite, because that's what they're going to have for the next 20, 30 years.
I think it's gonna be really important to leverage local relationships. So most of us that have been doing fixed wireless have done it out of need, or there's been demand. We've been able to build a business because there was demand that was not being met. So we've got a reputation for going out and taking care of people. And so I think it's fair for us to kind of be like, all right, we took care of you, now help take care of us. Let's partner up, let's figure out how to do these things.
Right. How could a WISP work with their, state broadband officer and say, hey, we'd be willing to build in fiber if this conditions were met? I mean, is that something you've considered, Matt?
I have. It's really difficult at the state level though, because most of the companies that are pushing fiber are heavily armed. We can barely even get attorneys and lobbyists to represent us because we always get conflict of interest cited. So that is a huge uphill battle at the state level. At the federal level, we've made a lot of progress with WISPA. I am really happy. I think WISPA is doing a fantastic job of trying to focus efforts on states to try and get that out there. I think we're going to have to work it from the bottom up, because if, a state deal comes in and says, we'll fund this, but we have the partnership already in place, we have the relationship locally, then we're going to be pushing back to make sure that, even if somebody's got the lobbying done on the state side, we're going to push back to make sure it doesn't happen, to make it as hard for them as they ever made it for us.
Well, thank you for those comments. Let's hear from Donnie, and we'll close off with Rory.
So Nebraska in particular is a very difficult state for
Amen,
wireless.
brother. Yeah.
They or any non-incumbent actually, any competitive carrier, it's a difficult state. Other states are paying much more attention to the local input, and I think Nebraska is going to be forced to in some of the way this money is going to come down as blocks, and so they're actually having the community sign off with people, and if they don't sign off, they're not going to fund it. And so if that happens, right, that's going to put a lot more power into the local guys, no matter who they are. And that's going to be important, and whether it's wireless or fiber. But I'm going to just ask this as a real quick question to the three of you guys. If you were funded, grant, and they say, we will fund you fiber, but we can't fund the wireless, would you take it? If they offered it to you?
If it fully paid for the fiber?
Yes, if it fully pays for your fiber.
Yes.
Matt?
Well,
I mean, it's kind of a dumb yes, right? But
maybe because there would be like.
You have to look at the OpEx.
Yeah, you have to look at the OpEx.
Because if you gotta go,
Yeah.
if you gotta.
So
bring
your
in somebody
OpEx
else's
is 1/20th of what your OpEx is on wireless, so
That
Depends on
depends.
how remote.
it's underground. It doesn't
So
matter.
this sounds like a
I mean, I'm just-
rhetorical question, but it's
Yeah.
it's
It's
rhetorical,
but
so
you
why
see
you
how
ask
It's
it,
kind
Donnie?
of a
Why you
loaded,
ask it?
it's kind of a
Right.
loaded question.
And it is, and that's the whole point. All this stuff is, it depends. And it's the same answer Matt's got from me every time he asks me, how much does it cost to do this? Or how much is this? It depends. And that's what all this stuff is. It depends on the circumstances, the qualifications, and what everybody's feelings are, both themselves and their communities.
All right, so let me ask you a question then.
Sure.
If you gave me all the money for fiber, it's gonna take me 3 to 4 years to build it out, but I got a bunch of kids that are stuck home next month, they're stuck home, and I can put wireless up there in 6 weeks, what would you do? Tell the kids, hey, wait for 3 years until we
Nope.
get your fiber to your house?
If it was me, if it was my company, I'd throw the wireless up right now and I'd take the money and build the fiber.
Okay, then that's pretty much, but
That's the whole thing.
if
you know,
it's your money, as opposed to government money,
I'm putting fiber out there.
well, good for you.
I'll get the
Well,
wireless up as quick as
let's
I
let
can.
Rory give us the last
But
word
yeah.
on his views
So-
of our topic here.
The bottom line with fiber, pre-funding, pre-crazy funding from the government was, we didn't see the financial need for it. And technology we were seeing catching up. So we saw people will pay for what they need. If you're forced to give them what they don't need, then somebody else has to foot that bill. We see that in the government completely changed that perspective. Now it's a question of, if you do get the money and you build it out, yeah, probably, but at the same time, you also have to look at time to the build out. And if the build out's gonna take several years and then you go wireless and then make the decision during that process if you still need to do the build out. To tell you the God honest truth, we don't see that as being either economical or efficient use of any tax dollars or our personal dollars.
Well, that will have to be our last word as we've just hit the 1 o'clock hour. Before I thank our guests, I want to remind everyone that we will be back here next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. Our topic will be Big Tech and the American Innovation and Choice Online Act. 2 weeks from today, we'll be talking about how technology helps the environment. 3 weeks from today, we'll be talking about broadband mapping and data, part 2 in a series. And then 4 weeks, we will be in person at Clyde's at Gallery Place, preparing for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act with NTIA Administrator Alan Davidson. On behalf of Jason, Matt, Donnie, and Rory, I'm Drew Clark of Broadband Breakfast. See you next Wednesday at